How's it going, everybody, and welcome to episode 306 of the Master My Garden podcast. Now, this week's episode is one I always cover this time of the year as we sort of close off or round off for Christmas. And it is the top 10 most popular podcast. And the way it's done is that it's the cumulative number of downloads of an individual episode across the lifespan of the podcast, which at this stage is five heading for 6 years. And yeah, the list has changed quite a lot over the last number of years, and I always exclude the episodes that are purely just myself. So any episodes that I'm just in on my own, I'll mention them, but I exclude them from the official top 10, so to speak. But the list has definitely changed, and I think it's always a it's a good indicator of what's really popular and what people resonate with. So yeah, I think it's always a good one to listen to. The list, as I said, changes and evolves over time. Hasn't been a huge amount in the last couple of years change in the top two or three. It'll be interesting to see if that changes. Um, it could potentially change a little bit this year, so it's going to be interesting to see. Um, Before we get into the top 10 and chat about all these brilliant episodes, what about this weather for the last sort of 6 weeks? So it's just the rain today has been phenomenal, and that's on top of all the rain that has fallen over the last week. Storm Bram has, landed in Ireland over the last week and caused yet more flooding and some damage from trees and so on. So yeah, it's been a really, really wet time. I will do the kind of review of the year next week, which kind of looks back over the course of the year and what the trends were, both for growing, for gardening, for the weather, and for the podcast itself. But yeah, it's been a horrible, horrible couple of weeks, and really making it difficult, especially for people in the bare root business or people looking to get some bare root work done, because it has been just so wet. Certainly finished the bulb season quite quickly, and there was still is time to plant, but of course the amount of rain that's fallen is really really causing that to be slowed or stopped, to be honest. But anyway, to get back to this, as I say, the top 10 episodes of the podcast, and it's always interesting to look back on it. And for me, it always gives me a good indication of what people resonate with, as I say. Um, as I mentioned, any that is just myself, I'll drop out of the official top 10, but I will tell you that there is four or five of episodes with just myself that are in the top 10, and I actually quite like that. The fact that they're not all just these, some of the names are kind of big names within gardening, and the fact that some of my own episodes are in the top 10, I quite like that, to be honest with you. So we'll start off with number 10, and this is a new entry to the number 10, and it's an episode that was released in September 2022, and it is Garden Design Tips with Jane McCorkle. And Jane runs her own uh, garden design and consultancy business outside of Dublin. And yeah, she does a lot of commercial work, a lot of work for private clients, commercial work, as I say, commercial projects for councils and all that sort of work. So she does all that type of thing. But I remember that episode particularly was, filled with really kind of good tips, good ideas, and talking about a lot of trends of the time. September 2022 it was released, and that this year I think is the first year it has been in the top 10. But a brilliant episode. Number nine on the list is one that has been consistently in the top 10 since it was released, all the way back in July 2022. And it was an episode with June Blake. And I suppose what was so good about that was June Blake and her garden up in County Wicklow would be r well known for how vibrant the colours are and it's a really special garden in terms of the summer color and the blast of color that you get up there. A lot of hot borders, as she described herself in the episode, but she mentions how she achieves this with the different types of plants and so on. And that episode really, really resonated and does continue to resonate with people. And that's episode 132. Always a good one to go back to because, as I say, there is plant names, plant choices in that are really, really good to, really good to kind of, if you're putting together a border to get a list of plants that you'll be able to put your border together or your plants list together with that. So that's a really, really good one to get back on. The next one is another new entry into the top 10. It's one that I knew would come into the top 10. And it was an interview I did with Kate Flood, who's the compost coach, affectionately known as the compost coach. And if you're on Instagram, you should definitely follow her. She is amazing at all things compost. And we talked about everything in that episode. I remember she was sitting in her car doing it, and she was in the countryside in Australia. You could see the trees in the background, and we started chatting, and it was nice and bright, but it was heading for evening time. And by the time the conversation finished, she was in complete darkness in the car, chatting away to me. But we talked everything from bokashi bins, hot composting, slow composting. We even chatted about roadkill and how you can use that to activate compost bins. It was a really interesting chat, and it was around the same time that she had launched her own book, which is called The Compost Coach. But it went through every type of composting, the process, how to achieve the results, and the pros and cons of each individual type. So it was a brilliant, brilliant episode, and that is in at number 8. Number 7 on the list is one that has been consistently in the top 10 since it was released, and it's Companion Planting Part 1. And every year this baffles me. This was part 1 of Companion Planting with Tanguy from Dunmore Country School. So it was one episode 1 week. The following week was part 2. They were both superb episodes. Number 1, the part 1 is in the top 10, so that means it's getting a huge amount of listens. The part 2 is way down the list, and it makes no sense because they're completely connected and linked. And people are definitely resonating with it. It's not that somebody listened to part 1 and thought part 2 wasn't worth listening to. Part 1 is huge numbers, and part 2 is just way down the list. I can't make sense of that part, to be honest, but that's the way it is. So we chatted about everything in that episode to do with companion planting, and it was companion planting in a very basic format in terms of putting beneficial plants that would attract in beneficial insects into your garden to help with pollination, with insect control and so on, but also companion planting in the sense that one works with the other, like the Three Sisters and so on. So we chatted about all those things, and that was episode 59. It was released all the way back in May 21. Part 2 was the following week, as I say, and they continue to be hugely popular. Well, part 1 continues to be hugely popular and is still in the top 10. Another one that took a few years to get into the top 10, but I kept saying that it would get there, and it certainly has this year. And it's a significant one. It's a significant episode anyway. It's episode 125, and it's with Dr. Elaine Ingham from the Soil Food Web. And for any of you that are not familiar with Dr. Elaine's work, she didn't invent the Soil Food Web, but she has definitely done a lot of the research that people use today in terms of soil health, in terms of nutrition, in terms of all the cycles that go on in a proper functioning soil. Really, really good on explaining it from a scientific perspective, but in a way that you and me can understand. And as I say, groundbreaking work over a long period of time. The reason I think it's particularly significant this year is that Dr. Ling retired recently from the Soil Food Web. Now, of course, she has set up She did was one of the founding members of the Soil Food Web, and they now have consultants and training, and you can become a Soil Food Web consultant. So her legacy and the work that she did will continue because there's a lot of these people getting trained up all over the world now and taking those principles and bringing them to their own countries, and the principles work everywhere in the world. So as I say, significant this year, but also I knew it was one that would break into the top 10. I think it did last year, but it's certainly pushing up the list now, and it's one that really everybody will get benefit out of if you're just gardening at home, or if you're market gardening, whatever the case may be. There's huge benefit in it because the knowledge that she has built up over a long career in soil health, really came to the fore, but in simple terms that, as I say, you and I could understand. So that's number six, Dr. Elaine Ingham, and significant this year because, as I say, she's recently retired. Next one, number five on the list, is brilliant gardener Klaus Leitenberger, and that was all the way back in October 2020, so a long time ago. And it has always been a popular episode, kind of goes up and down through the top 10, but it's episode 39, and we chat about all things organic growing. Klaus, as you know, I mentioned him so many times on the podcast in terms of his books and all that sort of thing. But he, chatted about good varieties, certain crops, his principles of growing, which is, organic growing. He chatted about growing in Ireland, top tips for, as I said, varieties and ways of doing things, and things that he's found over the years. And it was just a really informative episode. As I listen back to some of these over time, I would record or would have completely different interviews now, I guess. And I suppose at the end, when I talk about maybe the episodes myself, definitely there's things, you evolve and the information evolves and what I know evolves, and you'd have if you interviewed that person today, it would be, a different style or a different interview and would take a different angle. So that's why sometimes it's good to have people back on. But that episode, which is number five on the list, Klaus Leitenberger, excellent, excellent episode. The next one, number four on the list, has been always quite popular. He's a very popular gardener, very popular on YouTube. It's Niall Macaulay, so it's Niall Gardens is his YouTube channel. And he did go on afterwards and win the Alan Titchmarsh young gardener, or young for his YouTube channel, Young Influencer of the Year, Young Gardener of the Year, not exactly sure, but it was a huge award, well deserved. And that episode has always been quite popular, number four. And that was all the way back in June 2022. Niall, lovely guy, great episode. And we chatted about lots of things, kind of his tips for gardening. It was at that time we focused on a recent episode, or an episode that he had just released on his YouTube channel. And we talked about, the principles and the theories that he was talking about in that. And it was a really, really, really good one. Number three on the list is surprise to me, but it has climbed the list hugely this year. And it's how to grow lavender in Ireland. Now, I did write a blog post, which I never do, to be honest with you. Not very good at writing. Sorry, I'm okay at writing, but I just find it cumbersome. I prefer talking than writing. But I did write a blog post, and I think this has contributed to the rise in popularity of this, because I embed the podcast episode into the blog post, and it's how to grow lavender in Ireland. And it was an episode all the way back in June 21, I think, and it was with Moira Hart from Wexford Lavender Farm. And that's a famous lavender farm down in County Wexford. Has the big purple door in the middle of it, and one that's famous for photographs and weddings and all that sort of stuff. But we talked about how to grow lavender successfully, because, as you know, lavender is a crop, or is a flower that likes to have drier conditions, and we certainly can't claim to have that here. But if you're growing the right varieties, you can be very successful with it. And that's what the episode was kind of centered on. And yeah, that is all the way up in number three now. And I think people are finding it because people want to grow lavender, and they're finding maybe struggling to get it to grow, or they want to have a good display of lavender, and somebody has said that it's difficult to grow, and then they've looked it up and they've found the podcast through this blog post, which is driving the listens on that particular episode. And yeah, it seems to be, but it's a new entry into the top 10, and certainly a very good episode when it comes to that specific topic of growing lavender. We talk about the using the hardy varieties, the Munstead and the Hitcoat, as opposed to the more European varieties that you might see out there. Number two and number one, no change, and hasn't been a change for a couple of years, and it's no real surprise, to be honest with you. Number two on the list is episode 26, and it goes all the way back to July 2020. And it was an episode that I recorded in person with Sandro Caffola, who is, as I've said many, many times, the the foremost expert on wildflowers in Ireland. He knows everything that there is to be known about wildflowers. And we chatted about everything to do with, wildflower meadows, how they're creating ecosystems within people's gardens, about his business, which is, purely selling wildflowers. And yeah, it was a brilliant, brilliant episode. Really funny, witty, smart, everything that you would expect from Sandro, as I said, the top expert on wildflowers in Ireland. And that's number two, and continues to be the second most popular. The most popular episode of all time goes all the way back to February 21, and it is the number one for the last couple of years, and it's Charles Dowding. And strangely enough, somebody mentioned it to me recently, and I was on a bit of a drive, and I said, I must listen back to that. And I listened back to it only recently in the last couple of weeks. And yeah, they say you should never listen back to yourself, but if I was doing that interview tomorrow again, it will be totally different. Now, there is reasons for it. At the time, I was familiar with no dig, but had never practiced it. Since then, or almost since that time, I've been pretty much all the veg garden has been exclusively no dig gardening. And so now at that time, I was asking questions about how to and what to expect. Now, with the experience that I've built up on in no dig gardening, I already know a lot of the results based stuff, what I'm going to see, what's going to happen, how to set it up. I know all that stuff now. So I think the conversation will be very, very different. I must actually, see, can I get Charles back on at some point in time, or possibly even see, could we do something in person at some point. But yeah, it's number one, continues to be number one. It's number one by a nice distance, but not as much as it used to be. So all the others are pushing up towards it. But it's definitely if I listen back to Sandro's episode, I probably wouldn't change a whole lot in it. It's quite similar to what I would do if I was doing it today. But certainly the likes of Charles's one, it would be a totally different interview. More because I know so much more about it now than I did at that time, and I have the experience of a few years of using no dig. But yeah, I listened back to it recently, and I was going, wow, did I really ask that question? But I asked it because at the time I didn't know, and now I do know. So it's, it takes time, and things do evolve and change. Just want to mention a few. As I say, I don't put them into the top 10, but some episodes with just myself that are, well, actually, there's five of them that would be in the top 10 in terms of most popular. So just to give them a quick mention, there's one, the highest one is the top 10 perennials to sow in autumn for summer. So you're essentially what we were doing in the grow along this year, and the seeds that we were growing in that. But this went all the way back to August 2022, and it was going through a list of top 10. And I know a lot of people used that episode to go on and grow their own seeds that they ended up in putting into their own gardens. And that one is actually way up the list. Would Don't have the actual numbers there in front of me, but I think from memory, if I put it into the top 10, it would be up around number three or number four. So that was hugely popular. What to sow in the month of March, the monthly sowing guide ones, there's almost every one of them are just thereabouts in the top 10. So that's good to see as well. Another one, which is not one of my own, just outside the top 10, but continuing to be really popular, is Perennial Veg with Patrick Hunt. And yeah, there's a lot of the how-to video or the what to sow this month. Those ones are all up there in terms of most popular. So it was really interesting. There's a lot of episodes, a lot of good episodes there, and there is some kind of bits of change within the top 10. I suppose there's lots that I still feel are potentially better than some of the ones in the top 10. There's some, even as I think back on it myself, there's some really exceptional interviews and even individual ones with myself that I feel are more beneficial. But yeah, the most popular is the most popular. It's the ones that are being listened to. It's the ones that are being downloaded. And yeah, it's nice to look back on it, and it is nice to at this time of the year to see again what is resonating with people and what's driving the listens, because then that will dictate what will be popular and what will be useful for people going forward. So yeah, that's pretty much this week's episode. Next week's episode is the final recap of the year. So I do like to do that one. Again, we look back on the growing year, we look back on the podcast year, and we sort of have a summary of all of those things, listeners, and so on. And then the podcast will be taking a little break. I'll go through all that next week, though. No need to mention that now. But for this week, that's it. The top 10, just to run through them one more time. Number 10 was episode 144 with Jane McCorkle, the garden design tips. Number 9 was June Blake, brilliant episode on colour in the garden. Number 8 was the Kate Flood, the compost coach, again super. Number 7 was Tanguy from Dunmore Country School with companion planting. Number 6, Dr. Elaine Ingham from the Soil Food Web. As I say, significant now that she has retired. Number 5 is Klaus Leitenberger. Number 4 was Niall Macaulay from Niall Garden's YouTube channel. Number 3 was How to Grow Lavender in Ireland. Definitely one that shocks me that it's up there. Not because it's not good, but because it's such a niche topic. But obviously, it's something that resonates with people, or it's something that people are searching and looking for. Number 2, no surprise to me, Sandro Caffola. And number 1, again, Charles Dowding continues to be hugely popular and talking about the principles of no dig. So yeah, that's the run through. Next week we'll chat about the overview of the podcast, the overview of the growing year, and then we'll wind down for a well-earned break. But that's been this week's episode. Thanks for listening, and until the next time, happy gardening.